Get your foot off my porch, Dad, before you ruin everything. My 29-year-old son, Julian, slammed his shoulder against the solid oak front door of my own home, physically blocking the doorway with both hands spread wide. Through the 3-inch gap in the frame, I could hear champagne flutes clinking and my daughter-in-law Chloe's slick, manipulative voice bragging to her family. Don't worry about the old man. The deed transfer is already filed, and he's far too stupid about legal paperwork to realize his house belongs to our loan company now. I stood on the wet porch steps in my oil-stained work jacket, holding a heavy steel pipe wrench. I had spent 28 years crawling through burning hot industrial boiler lines to pay off every single penny of this 5-acre property. Now, my own son was looking at me like I was a filthy trespasser trying to break into his private party. "Julian," I said, my voice dropping into a deadly, quiet whisper, "move your arm off my doorway right now." "No way, Dad," he yelled, his eyes darting frantically toward the living room. "Chloe's investors are closing the deal inside. You're covered in grease and grease stains. Go sit in your truck until they leave." "Sit in my truck?" I repeated, taking one heavy step up the porch stairs. "In the driveway of the house I bought before you were even born?" "You don't get it, Dad," Julian sneered, leaning his entire body weight against the oak door to lock the deadbolt from the inside. "Things are different now. You don't call the shots in this family anymore." The lock clicked shut right in my face. I stood there in the freezing rain, staring at the brass keyhole. My hands weren't shaking from the cold. They were trembling with a cold, terrifying rage. For 28 years as a master industrial pressure auditor, I had learned one absolute rule about life. When a high-pressure line is about to burst, screaming at the pipe doesn't stop the explosion. You don't argue with steam. You stay completely silent, locate the main isolation valve, and cut off the flow before the whole building blows to pieces. I turned my back on the front door, walked down the wet concrete steps, and got into my heavy pickup truck. I didn't drive away. I backed the truck into the shadows under the oak trees across the lane, shifted into park, and dialed the one man in this county who knew how to dig through financial garbage. Caleb Ross picked up on the second ring. Caleb was a retired forensic investigator for the state tax division, a man who could spot a stolen dollar through 10 layers of shell companies. "Victor?" Caleb asked, hearing my heavy breathing through the speaker. "What's wrong? You sound like an industrial boiler with a stuck pressure relief valve." "Caleb," I said, keeping my eyes locked on the bright chandelier lights shining through my living room window. "My son just locked me out of my own house. His wife, Chloe, is inside telling a room full of strangers that my property deed belongs to them. I need you to run a full title sweep on my address right now." There was a 5-second pause on the line. Then I heard the sharp click of Caleb's keyboard. "Give me 2 minutes, Victor," Caleb muttered, his voice instantly turning dead serious. "I'm pulling up the county land registry records." While I waited, I watched the silhouettes through my living room curtain. Chloe was holding up a tall glass, pouring wine for her mother Victoria and her brother Brandon. They were laughing hysterically. Julian was standing right beside her, nodding like a brainless puppet, holding a pen over a thick blue document spread out on my dining table. "Victor," Caleb's voice came back through the phone, colder than the rain falling on my windshield. "When was the last time you signed a quitclaim deed or a limited power of attorney?" "Never," I said flatly. "I haven't signed a single property paper since I paid off my mortgage 9 years ago." "Then we have a catastrophic emergency," Caleb said softly. "A document was recorded with the county clerk 6 days ago. It transfers your entire 5-acre parcel and the main house into a limited liability company called Aegis Equity Holdings. The managing partner listed on the filing is Chloe Mercer." My heart hammered against my ribs like a loose piston. "What about my signature?" "It has your name on it, Victor. Notarized, stamped, and officially recorded," Caleb said. "And there's more. Aegis Equity Holdings just took out a $450,000 hard money bridge loan against your land. The lender is a high-interest commercial firm downtown. The first interest payment of $12,000 was due yesterday." I stared through the rain at my son's smiling face through the window. Everything clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The missing mail over the past 2 months, the strange phone calls Chloe answered in hushed whispers on the back deck, The sudden interest Julian had taken in my retirement savings accounts under the guise of helping Mom and Dad with estate planning. They hadn't just tried to ask for help. They had constructed a legal trap designed to steal my life's work, mortgage it to the tilt, and leave me holding the debt while they burned through the cash. "Caleb," I whispered, gripping the steering wheel so hard the leather cracked under my knuckles. "Can they kick me and Helen out of the house with that document?" "If that loan defaults, and hard money bridge loans are designed to default, the lender can initiate non-judicial foreclosure in 30 days, Caleb warned. "They won't just kick you out, Victor. They will sell your land on the courthouse steps to the highest bidder." "Not while I'm still breathing," I said. "Where do we start?" "We don't start by charging in there with a baseball bat," Caleb said firmly. "Chloe works as a senior escrow officer at a commercial title company. She knows every legal loophole in the book. If you attack her without ironclad proof, she'll claim you gave her verbal authorization and try to slap a restraining order on you to keep you off the property entirely. We need to trap her legally, publicly, and completely." "What do you need me to do?" "Go home tonight," Caleb instructed. "Act like you suspect nothing. Swallow your pride, pretend you're just a dumb old mechanic who didn't understand why the door was locked, and watch every move she makes. I'm calling Evelyn Cross right now." Evelyn Cross was the most feared real estate fraud attorney in the state. If Caleb was bringing her in, this wasn't going to be a quiet family conversation. This was going to be a total war. I shut off the phone, took 3 deep breaths, and let the rage inside me settle into a hard, ice-cold resolve. For 28 years, I had maintained systems under extreme pressure. I knew how to wait. I knew how to watch. And I knew exactly how to dismantle a dangerous apparatus piece by piece. I opened the truck door, stepped back out into the rain, and walked up the porch steps for the second time. This time, I didn't knock. I took out my heavy work key, jammed it into the lower deadbolt that Julian hadn't locked, turned it with all my strength, and threw my shoulder against the oak frame. The door burst open with a loud bang, slamming against the interior wall. The laughter in the living room stopped instantly. Chloe dropped her wine glass. It shattered across the hardwood floor, dark red liquid splashing over her expensive leather shoes. Victoria gasped, clutching her gold necklace, while Brandon jumped up from the dining chair as if he had been shocked with a live wire. Julian spun around, his face turning ghostly pale. "Dad? What the hell are you doing? I told you we were busy!" I stepped into the entryway, letting the heavy oak door swing shut behind me. I didn't yell. I didn't raise my fist. I just stood there, dripping rainwater onto the rug, looking directly at Chloe. "Sorry to interrupt the celebration," I said, my voice smooth and level. I dropped my grease towel in the hallway. "Chloe, why does your mother have her shoes on my wife's hand-woven carpet?" Chloe recovered her composure with scary speed. She forced a bright, practiced smile onto her face, stepping over the broken glass with smooth, calculated grace. "Oh, Victor," she cooed, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "We were just having an impromptu family meeting about the restaurant lease." Julian locked the door by mistake because the wind was blowing so hard. "We didn't mean to keep you out in the rain." "Is that right?" I said, walking slowly toward the dining table. My eyes swept over the papers scattered across the wood. "Looks like some pretty heavy reading for a restaurant lease." Julian scrambled forward, grabbing the stack of blue folders and shoving them into his leather briefcase before I could reach them. "It's just boring commercial paperwork, Dad. You wouldn't understand any of it anyway. It's all high-level corporate law." "Right," I said, looking straight into my son's sweating, terrified eyes. "High-level corporate law. Well, don't let me interrupt your big deal. I'm going upstairs to see your mother." I turned and walked up the staircase, feeling 4 pairs of eyes burning holes into my back. Every step I took sounded like a ticking clock in my head. They thought they were clever. They thought a blue-collar father who spent his life covered in boiler soot was too simple-minded to read a land registry index. They had no idea that the trap had just been set, and the trigger was already under my thumb. When I reached the master bedroom at the end of the hall, I found my wife, Helen, sitting on the edge of the bed. Her hands were folded tightly in her lap, and her eyes were red from crying silently. "Victor?" she whispered, standing up the moment I closed the door. What is happening downstairs? Chloe told me 2 hours ago that I shouldn't leave the bedroom because her financial partners were discussing private business. I walked over, took Helen's hands in mine, and squeezed them tightly. Her skin was cold. "Helen," I said quietly, "look at me." She lifted her eyes to mine, filled with worry. "Did you sign any papers for Chloe over the last 2 weeks?" I asked. "Anything at all? A tax form, a trust update, a delivery receipt?" Helen blinked, thinking back. "No, well, 3 weeks ago, Chloe brought over a package of documents while you were at the regional union meeting. She said it was an insurance update for our home coverage. She told me you had already approved it verbally and just needed me to sign the witness line." My stomach turned to pure lead. "Did you sign it, Helen?" I signed the witness line," Helen whispered, her voice trembling. "Victor, what did she do? What did our son do?" "They forged my name on a quitclaim deed," I told her, keeping my voice steady so she wouldn't panic. "They transferred ownership of our house to a dummy corporation and took out a $450,000 loan against it." Helen staggered back against the mattress, her hand flying to her mouth. A choked sob escaped her throat. "Our house? The house we spent 28 years paying off? How could Julian do that to us? We paid for his college. We gave them $70,000 for their business startup." "Listen to me, Helen," I said, grabbing her shoulders and looking directly into her eyes. "I need you to stay strong. We are not going to lose this house. We are not going to let them steal our life. But for the next 48 hours, you cannot let them know that we are on to them. If Chloe suspects we know about the deed fraud, she will move that money out of the loan account before we can get a court injunction." Helen wiped her eyes with the back of her sleeve. The despair in her expression slowly gave way to the sharp, fiercely protective motherly rage I had known for 35 years. "What do you want me to do, Victor?" she asked, her voice turning solid as iron. "Tomorrow morning, Chloe is going to bring you a cup of tea, just like she always does," I said. "She's going to smile, she's going to act sweet, and she's going to pretend she's the best daughter-in-law in the world. You are going to look her in the eye, sip your tea, and thank her." "And then?" Helen asked. "And then," I whispered, "we destroy her." At 7:30 the next morning, I drove straight to the law offices of Evelyn Cross downtown. Caleb was already sitting in the conference room, 2 giant paper cups of black coffee resting on the mahogany table alongside a 6-inch thick stack of legal prints. Evelyn Cross didn't waste time with handshakes or small talk. She was a woman in her late 50s with silver-streaked hair, sharp blue eyes, and a sharp, no-nonsense demeanor. "Mr. Mercer," Evelyn said, sliding a document across the table toward me. "Caleb filled me in on the basic details last night. I spent the last 3 hours pulling the full filing packet from the county database. Take a look at page 4. I leaned over and looked at the photocopy of the quitclaim deed. There, at the bottom of the page, was my name printed in dark black ink. Victor E. Mercer. Beside it was a formal notary seal bearing the name Aegis Title and Escrow Services, stamped by a notary public named Marcus Vance. "That's my name," I said, examining the signature closely. "It looks remarkably like my handwriting, the slant, the stroke weight, the tail on the letter R. She didn't just scribble this. She traced it from an old document." "She's a senior escrow officer," Evelyn said dryly. "She has access to high-resolution digital signature pads and deed archives every single day. Tracing your signature was the easiest part of her crime. But she made 2 fatal mistakes." "What mistakes?" I asked. Evelyn pulled out a magnifying glass and laid it over the signature. "First, look at the middle initial E. In your official signature on your driver's license and your bank records, how do you write the capital E?" I stared at the paper. I always put a small, horizontal hash mark through the center bar of the E. It's a habit I picked up 30 years ago when I was signing off on pressure safety certifications for industrial municipal boilers. If a safety tag didn't have that double hash, the city inspectors knew it was a fake tag. "Exactly," Evelyn said, a cold, satisfied smile touching her lips. "The signature on this forged deed is missing the hash mark. Chloe copied your standard everyday signature from a birthday card or a casual check, not knowing that your legally registered bank signature card contains that specific anti-fraud mark." "And what's the second mistake?" I asked. Caleb leaned forward, slamming a printed state registry sheet onto the table. The notary public who allegedly stamped this deed, Marcus Vance, I ran his commission number through the Secretary of State's portal 20 minutes ago. And? Marcus Vance was an escrow officer who worked at Chloe's firm 3 years ago, Caleb said grimly. His notary commission was revoked 24 months ago after he was caught falsifying mortgage signatures, and he passed away from a stroke 8 months ago. Chloe used the stolen physical stamp of a dead man to notarize your deed. A sharp electric jolt ran down my spine. Using a dead notary's stamp? That's not just a civil real estate dispute. It's aggravated grand larceny, first-degree forgery, wire fraud, and identity theft, Evelyn stated flatly. It is a Class B felony carrying a mandatory sentence of up to 15 years in state prison. I sat back in my chair, processing the sheer criminality of what my son and his wife had done. They hadn't just made a bad financial decision. They had executed a premeditated, cold-blooded felony strike against my home, using dead men's seals and forged handwriting. What about Julian? I asked, my voice tight. Did he sign anything? Julian's name is on the corporate filings for Aegis Equity Holdings as a managing member, Evelyn revealed, sliding another sheet toward me. He signed the hard money loan agreement as a guarantor. Whether he knew about the dead notary stamp or not doesn't matter in the eyes of the law. He signed a commercial loan backed by stolen property. He is an active co-conspirator. I closed my eyes for 3 seconds, feeling an agonizing knot twist in my chest. My own son. The boy I had taught to ride a bicycle. The boy whose college tuition I had paid by working 60-hour shifts in 90-degree boiler rooms, had willingly put his signature on a document designed to rob his own parents. Mr. Mercer, Evelyn said gently, watching my face. We can file an emergency quiet title action and file a police report right now. But if we do that immediately, Chloe's defense attorney will argue that this was a family misunderstanding or an accidental paperwork error. Hard money lenders move fast. If the money from that $450,000 loan gets wired out of the escrow account to an offshore entity or spent on their debt, recovering it will take years of costly litigation. So what do we do? I asked, opening my eyes. We set a trap, Evelyn said, her eyes turning cold and razor-sharp. According to the loan records, the hard money lender requires a final, physical owner verification affidavit to be signed in person by the property owner before the final funds are released. That closing meeting is scheduled for tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock at Chloe's title firm. They need my real signature, I realized instantly. Yes, Evelyn nodded. Chloe was planning to bring those papers home tonight, trick you or Helen into signing them under the guise of an annual property tax update, and submit them tomorrow morning to get the $450,000 wired into her personal account. She won't get a single penny, I said through my teeth. Oh, she will think she's getting it, Evelyn countered with a vicious little smile. You are going to let her bring those papers home tonight. You are going to pretend to sign them, but you will sign them with a specific legal reservation mark that my office will provide. Meanwhile, I will obtain a sealed emergency injunction from Superior Court Judge Harold Miller at 8:30 tomorrow morning. And when she presents the forged deed to the lenders? Caleb asked. When she walks into that conference room tomorrow morning expecting to collect her $450,000, Evelyn declared, the police, the bank auditors, and my team will be waiting right behind the door. I drove back home that afternoon with a heavy heart, but my mind was clearer than it had been in years. The storm was coming, and I was going to make sure every single leak was sealed tight. When I pulled into the driveway, I saw Chloe's sleek silver sedan parked right near the front steps. I walked into the house, wiping my boots at the door. The smell of baked cinnamon rolls filled the kitchen. Chloe was standing at the island in a neat white blouse, carefully placing fresh rolls onto a porcelain plate. Julian was sitting at the kitchen table, staring blankly at his laptop screen, his face pale and sunken. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in 3 days. "Victor," Chloe called out merrily, turning around with a radiant smile. "You're home early. I baked fresh cinnamon rolls for you and Helen. You work so hard out there in the cold. You deserve a warm treat." I walked over to the island, picked up a cinnamon roll, and looked at her. Her smile was flawless. Her eyes were warm, bright, and completely devoid of any sign of guilt. It was horrifying. A woman who had just stolen my life's work was standing in my kitchen serving me pastries with the sweet charm of a loving daughter. "Thanks, Chloe," I said, keeping my voice utterly devoid of emotion. "Where's Helen?" "She's resting upstairs," Julian mumbled from the table, not looking up from his screen. Dad, can we talk for a minute, privately? Chloe's eyes snapped toward Julian instantly, a sharp, silent warning flashing across her face before she quickly smoothed it over. Julian, honey, Chloe interrupted smoothly. Let your father eat his cinnamon roll first. Besides, we have those routine county property documents to go over later tonight, remember? What documents? I asked, taking a slow bite of the roll. Chloe pulled a neat blue envelope from her leather tote bag and laid it gently on the counter. Oh, it's just a minor administrative update from the county tax assessor's office, she explained with an effortless laugh. Because of the new zoning regulations on 5-acre parcels, the county needs all primary homeowners to sign a simple verification form to keep your property tax rate locked in at the lower rate. It saves you about $2,000 a year. $2,000? I said, raising an eyebrow. That sounds real helpful, Chloe. You always look out for us, don't you? Family has to look out for family, Victor, she said smoothly, her eyes shining with absolute triumph. I'll leave the papers right here on the counter. You and Helen can sign the highlighted lines after dinner, and I'll drop them off at the county office tomorrow morning on my way to work. Sounds like a plan, I said. I turned my head and looked at my son. Julian, come out to the garage with me. I need help lifting a heavy boiler valve out of the truck. Julian flinched. Dad, I'm kind of busy with... Now, Julian, I said, my voice dropping into the deep, commanding tone I had used when he was a boy. Julian swallowed hard, shut his laptop, and slowly stood up. Chloe watched us walk out to the garage, her brow furrowing with a tiny sliver of suspicion. Once inside the cold, concrete garage, I shut the heavy side door and turned off the automatic opener so no one could interrupt us. The room was filled with the smell of motor oil, steel tools, and sawdust. Julian stood near my workbench, wiping his sweating palms on his jeans. What's wrong, Dad? What valve do you need moved? I didn't answer. I walked over to my tool cabinet, pulled out a heavy steel clipboard, and threw it onto the wooden workbench between us. It hit the wood with a sharp, echoing crack. Dad? Julian stammered, stepping back. How much are you losing a month on that luxury wellness spa downtown, Julian? I asked quietly. Julian froze as if he had been struck by lightning. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Answer me! I snapped, slamming my hand onto the workbench. How much debt are you in? Julian's knees seemed to buckle. He grabbed the edge of the bench to support himself, his eyes wide with utter terror. How do you know about that? I know everything, Julian, I snarled, stepping up until I was inches from his face. I know about the $18,000 a month in unpaid commercial rent. I know about the $480,000 in hard money loans, and I know that your slick title agent wife forged my signature on a quitclaim deed, using the stamp of a dead notary public. Julian gasped, letting out a choked, pathetic cry. He collapsed onto an upside-down wooden crate, burying his face in his hands. Dad, please, he sobbed, his shoulders shaking uncontrollably. We were desperate. The spa was going under. The lease company threatened to sue us and seize our personal bank accounts. Chloe said it was just a temporary bridge loan. She said we would pay it back in 3 months before you ever found out. You stole my house, Julian, I roared, my voice echoing off the concrete walls. You locked me out on my own porch yesterday so you could sign papers giving away the land your mother and I slaved over for 30 years. You stood there and watched her trade away my home. I didn't want to. Julian wept, looking up with red, tear-filled eyes. Chloe told me that if I didn't help her get the trust paperwork, she would leave me and put all the business debt entirely in my name. She said you had hundreds of thousands in equity just sitting there doing nothing. She said you wouldn't even notice. Wouldn't notice? I shouted. I'm a pressure auditor. I notice every leak, every crack, every loose screw. And you, my own son, turned out to be the rottenest pipe in the whole house. Julian fell off the crate onto his knees, grabbing the hem of my work jacket. Dad, please, don't call the police. Chloe is turning in the final verification form tomorrow morning. Once the $450,000 is wired, we'll pay off the spa debt, cancel the hard money mortgage, and transfer the deed back to your name. I promise you, Dad, just give us 3 months. I looked down at my son lying on the cold concrete floor, weeping like a terrified coward. The sheer disgrace of it made my stomach turn. He wasn't crying because he felt remorse for betraying his parents. He was crying because his cozy, fraudulent world was crashing down around his ears. I pulled my jacket out of his grasp. "Get up," I said coldly. "Dad, please," he begged. "I said get up," I commanded. Julian scrambled to his feet, trembling like a leaf in a hurricane. "You are going to go back into that kitchen," I told him, every word dripping with absolute ice. "You are going to sit down at that table. You are going to act like nothing happened. If you drop even one hint to Chloe that I know what you've done, I won't just let the state prosecutor take her. I will personally sign the criminal complaint that sends you to prison right beside her." Julian nodded frantically, wiping his nose with his sleeve. "I won't say a word. I swear to God, Dad, I won't say a word." "Go inside," I said, turning my back on him. That night, the house was deathly quiet. Chloe sat in the living room, watching television with a glass of white wine, completely unaware that the ground beneath her feet was dissolving into liquid mud. At 10 o'clock, I took the blue envelope she had left on the kitchen counter and brought it into my study. I opened the file. Inside was the owner verification affidavit for the hard money loan, the final document required to trigger the wire transfer of $450,000. I picked up my black ink pen. I signed my name across the primary line, Victor E. Mercer. But right beneath the signature, in tiny microscopic letters hidden inside the decorative borderline, a trick Evelyn Cross had taught me, I penned the legal abbreviation VCR, V coactus scripsi. In common law, V coactus scripsi means signed under duress and fraud. It legally voids the signature the exact moment it is entered into a court record. I placed the document back into the blue envelope, walked into the hallway, and set it neatly on Chloe's tote bag. The trap was baited. The trigger was set, and the morning was coming. At 8:15 the next morning, I stood inside the glass-walled lobby of Aegis Title and Escrow Services downtown. I was dressed in a dark gray suit, standing beside Caleb Ross and attorney Evelyn Cross. Two unmarked police sedans were parked outside the building. Sitting in the back seat of the lead car was Detective Miller from the Financial Crimes Unit, holding a signed warrant for arrest and an emergency court injunction issued by Judge Harold Miller 45 minutes earlier. Through the glass conference room doors at the end of the hall, I could see Chloe. She was sitting at a grand mahogany table, dressed in a sharp navy business suit, laughing and chatting with two men in high-end suits, the representatives from the hard money lending company. Julian was sitting beside her, looking like a corpse in a suit, staring blankly at his cold cup of coffee.
"There she goes,"
Caleb whispered, pointing through the glass. Chloe reached into her tote bag, pulled out the blue envelope I had signed the night before, and slid it proudly across the table to the chief lending officer. "Here is the fully executed owner verification affidavit, signed directly by Victor Mercer," Chloe announced, her voice carrying clearly through the cracked door. "Everything is completely verified, notarized, and legally clear. You can authorize the $450,000 wire transfer to Aegis Equity Holdings immediately." The lending officer picked up the document, adjusted his glasses, and reached for his telephone to confirm the bank transfer. "That's our signal," Evelyn Cross said calmly. Evelyn turned to Detective Miller, who was walking into the lobby with two uniformed officers right behind him. "Execute the warrant, Detective," Evelyn instructed. Detective Miller nodded, pushed open the heavy glass doors of the conference room, and stepped inside. Chloe looked up, startled by the intrusion. "Excuse me, this is a private commercial closing. You can't just walk in here." "Chloe Mercer?" Detective Miller interrupted, pulling his gold badge from his jacket pocket. "I am Detective Miller with the County Financial Crimes Unit. I have a warrant for your arrest." The room went dead silent. The lending officer dropped the blue envelope onto the table as if it were coated in poison. "What is the meaning of this?" "The deed and the affidavit you are holding are fraudulent documents," Evelyn Cross announced, stepping into the conference room right behind the officers. "They were generated using forged signatures and the stolen seal of a deceased notary public." Judge Harold Miller issued a total asset freeze on Aegis Equity Holdings 30 minutes ago. Chloe's face went from professional confidence to pure, unadulterated horror in less than 2 seconds. She slammed her hands onto the table, standing up so fast her chair knocked over against the wall. "This is ridiculous!" Chloe shrieked, her voice screeching into a high-pitched panic. "I am a senior escrow officer. My father-in-law signed those papers voluntarily. He authorized this entire transaction." I stepped out from behind Detective Miller, walking slowly to the head of the table. "Did I, Chloe?" I asked, my voice ringing out with terrifying authority. Chloe froze. Her eyes bulged as she looked at me standing there in my gray suit, flanked by a federal fraud lawyer and 3 police officers. "Victor," she stammered, her flawless facade shattering into 1,000 jagged pieces. "Victor, please. This is just a misunderstanding. We were doing this to help Julian's business.
We were going to pay you back."
"You forged my signature," I said, pointing at the quitclaim deed spread across the table. "You left off the double hash mark on my middle initial E. You stole the stamp of Marcus Vance, a man who died 8 months ago. And you pledged my 5-acre home to a loan shark so you could bail out your failing luxury spa." The 2 hard money lenders stood up instantly, their faces turning red with fury. "You brought us forged paper? Are you insane?" "Detective," Evelyn said, sliding a certified copy of the court injunction across the table. "Take her into custody." Detective Miller stepped forward, grabbing Chloe's arm and twisting it behind her back. The sharp clink of steel handcuffs echoed loudly through the quiet conference room. "Get your hands off me!" Chloe screamed, thrashing violently as the officers snapped the metal cuffs around her wrists. "Julian, do something! Tell them you authorized it!
Tell them it was your idea."
Julian sat in his chair, trembling uncontrollably, his head buried in his hands. He didn't lift a finger. He didn't say a single word. "Julian!" Chloe shrieked, her eyes burning with pure, unhinged venom as the officers dragged her toward the door. "You spineless coward! You gave me his Social Security card. You stole his bank statements out of the mailbox every afternoon so he wouldn't see the default warnings. You're just as guilty as I am." The entire office floor stood in shocked silence as Chloe was hauled out through the glass doors, screaming profanities at the top of her lungs, her career, her reputation, and her freedom completely destroyed in front of all her co-workers. Only Julian remained, sitting alone at the giant mahogany table, weeping quietly into his hands. I walked over and stood right beside my son. "Look at me, Julian," I said softly. Julian slowly lifted his tear-stained face, looking up at me with absolute despair. "Dad."
"What's going to happen to me?"
"Evelyn is going to hand over all the records showing you were manipulated into signing the corporate filings," I told him, my voice flat and devoid of any warmth. "Because you didn't physically forge the notary stamp, the prosecutor is likely going to offer you a deferred prosecution agreement. You won't go to state prison." Julian let out a huge breath of relief. "Thank God. Thank God." "Don't thank God yet, Julian," I interrupted coldly. "You won't go to prison, but you are going to lose everything else. The spa will be liquidated by the bankruptcy court. Your credit is destroyed for the next decade, and as of 9 o'clock this morning, you no longer have a family." Julian blinked, terror flashing in his eyes again. "Dad, what are you saying?" "I am saying," I whispered, leaning down until I was inches from his ear, "that when a pipe is rusted clear through to the core, you don't patch it. You cut it out and throw it in the trash." I turned around, walked out of the conference room, and stepped out into the crisp, clean morning air. 2 days later, on a bright Saturday morning, Caleb Ross drove his truck up my driveway. In the bed of his truck was a heavy steel box containing a commercial-grade keyless electronic deadbolt system. I stood on the front porch with a heavy screwdriver, unscrewing the old brass lock from my solid oak front door, the same lock Julian had braced his shoulder against 4 days earlier. The old lock clattered onto the porch floorboards like a piece of useless junk. I installed the new steel deadbolt, tightened every mounting bolt with my torque wrench, and programmed a new 6-digit security code that only Helen and I knew. As I finished testing the latch, a yellow taxi pulled up to the front gate. Julian stepped out of the cab. He was carrying a single canvas duffel bag containing the few clothes Helen had packed for him. He looked thin, exhausted, and completely broken. He walked slowly up the concrete driveway, stopping at the bottom of the porch steps. He didn't dare step onto the wood. "Dad," Julian whispered, his voice trembling in the morning breeze, "Mom won't answer my phone calls. My key doesn't work on the gate." I stood at the top of the porch stairs, looking down at my only son. "Your key will never work here again, Julian," I said, my voice steady as granite. "Dad, please," Julian wept, big tears rolling down his cheeks. "I made a terrible mistake. I was stupid. I let Chloe manipulate me. I'm your son. You can't just throw me out like this." "I am not throwing you out, Julian. I said quietly. I am letting you experience the reality you created. You chose to standing on this porch and block my doorway while an outsider tried to steal my life. You proved that you are not strong enough to protect this family.
Dad, give me one more chance, he begged, taking one step toward the stairs.
Stop, I commanded, holding up my hand. Julian froze. If you want to rebuild your life, Julian, you do it somewhere else, I told him. You work, you pay off your debts, and you learn what it means to be an honest man. Maybe in 5 years, maybe in 10, you can stand on this porch again. But today you leave. Julian stared at me for a long, painful minute, searching my face for any sign of hesitation. He found none. Slowly, his shoulders slumped. He wiped his face with the back of his hand, picked up his canvas bag, turned around, and walked back down the driveway toward the main road. I watched his retreating silhouette until he vanished past the oak trees at the end of the lane. I turned back to the front door, pushed it open, and stepped inside. Helen was standing in the hallway, holding 2 warm mugs of black coffee. She handed one to me, her eyes clear, peaceful, and filled with unbroken strength. We walked into the living room, sat down by the fireplace, and looked out the clean glass window at our 5 acres of land. The house was quiet again. The system was completely sealed, and the pressure was finally gone.